and we didn't start the recording until now, which is why I restated our names. A couple of more things. We would love to have you live tweet and share your insights during today's event. If you choose to do so, you can use the book title Talent Magnet to share your thoughts on Twitter. Another thing you might want to know is that, yes, we are recording today's session. We will share the recording with you so that you can share it with others. And we will also be sending this PDF of the slides that Mark is using today in our follow-up email. So as we dive in, yes.
I think you mentioned it earlier. We will be taking questions. We've designed this segment, so I'm not going to talk too long. I want to be careful that I'm not guilty of answering questions that people aren't asking. So we'll move at some pace to get through the content and then open it up to the audience.
Yes, and so you will use the same question panel where you told me where you're calling in from, and you can put your questions there in the question panel at any time during Mark's presentation as you think of the questions, and then I'll be coming back on with Mark to have a conversation and bring those questions forward to Mark. So we invite your participation and engagement through the questions on today's call. I want to take a moment to introduce Mark in case you haven't been exposed to him and his work before. Talent Magnet, his book that is launching this week, is actually book number 7. It's also book number 3 in what Mark is calling the High Performance Leadership Series, which included the most recent one was Leaders Made Here, and before that, Chestnut Checkers. And those are the ones when you go to Mark's Amazon page that have the black and red covers. That's the High Performance Leadership Series. Probably Mark's best-selling book that has sold more than 500,000 copies is The Secret, and we celebrated the 10th anniversary of that last year. And Mark is the Vice President of High Performance Leadership at Chick-fil-A, and a father of 2 and a grandfather of 2 more, and a delightful friend. And so Mark, I'm just thrilled to be here with you again and looking forward to all that you'll be sharing with us today.
Well, thanks for pulling this together. Couldn't have done it without you.
Well, I'll see you back for questions, Mark.
All right. Well, let me start by setting just a little bit of context for you. You know, why would we do this work as an organization? Why would we sponsor this work? Why would we invest the last 2 years and lots of time, lots of energy, lots of money in exploring this topic of top talent? It really hinges on a very simple premise, that if you increase the caliber of your talent, the caliber of your players, you increase your chances of winning. And there is a war for talent out there, and it's real. And some organizations have dodged that for a season, but it is real. And shifting demographics, shifting marketplace, shifting customer demands, it's just getting harder and harder to get the men and women, the young people that we need to successfully operate our businesses. So we said, if we're going to jump in here and if we're going to try to explore this topic, we said, why don't we go after top talent? We said, let's try and answer the question, what does top talent really want? Now, let me give you a quick definition, and I want to forewarn you, it may not have the level of precision that some of you want, but you can imagine the challenges and the complexity with defining something like top talent. So I want to give you the essence of it, let you know what was in our head as we started this project. Imagine your best employee, not one of your senior leaders, not one of your middle managers, but one of your entry-level individual contributors. I want you to think about someone, call their name to mind, see their face. One of your very best team members. We wanted to do research to figure out what is it that attracts those people. Because if we could figure that out, our assumption is that we could reverse engineer what organizations have to offer to attract more of them. So that was the simple premise. Let me tell you just a little bit about the journey, and I don't want to belabor this, but this book is unique. I mean, we've done research for other books, but it's been much more qualitative, search for best practices, benchmarking, and I don't want to minimize that. We think that's a fabulous way to learn what works. But in this particular project, we wanted some data. And so again, without boring you with the details, it was a multifaceted approach. We did interviews with hundreds and hundreds of top talent. I personally interviewed over 200 men and women who were deemed top talent by their leaders. In total, that sample was almost 500 people. Then we did an online survey with over 7,000 participants. Then we went into the performance management systems of some big organizations. They gave us access to their employee data. And we said, we want to ask a series of structured questions to your people, but we want to attack it by looking at two very separate and discrete groups. We want to look at top talent. Now, in that setting, we identified the men and women who had scored their highest possible rating 3 consecutive years. So that's top talent for this facet of the study. And typical talent are those that scored just below them. We asked them structured interview questions electronically so that we could compare and contrast the answers. It was very insightful. And then the fourth and final piece, we did ethnography, where we actually, digital ethnography, I think is the term that the research firm used for it, but we followed along with top talent, prompting them and asking them questions and to share their observations and insights about their work. And we took all of that and put it together. And when we looked at the whole, we had data from participants from age 14 to 65 from all 50 states, all income levels, all types of organizations. And we were actually very, very thankful that we had looked at such a comprehensive data set. That may be more than you wanted to know, so let's cut to the chase. Let's talk about what did we learn? What did we learn? Now, I think the good news is that we found 3 primary findings, 3 fundamental things that top talent is looking for when they're trying to decide where they're going to work. And then we found one, I guess I would call it an indirect finding, and I'll share that with you a little bit later. Well, let's jump right in. The 3 things that top talent really wants. First, they want a better boss. Now, you may be thinking, whoa, 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 doesn't everybody want a better boss? Well, yeah, sort of. I mean, nobody's going to vote to have a crappy boss. I mean, I got that. But for top talent, it's actually a condition of employment. Typical talent might prefer a better boss, but they'll really work for anybody. And so that was a real insight for us. There is a very high bar for leadership when you're talking to top talent. Now, just a quick word. When we first started this project, I have to tell you, I mistakenly thought that I was working on an HR book. Now, nothing against the folks in HR, but I mean, I kind of had an HR bias. But at some point in the project, I said, no, this is actually going to be a leadership book talking about talent. Well, how do you make that, bridge? How do you close that gap? Well, what we decided is that we would identify some leadership behaviors that enable these key findings. So I'll illustrate it here with better boss. We ask a whole lot of people, tell us, what do you want from a better boss? How would you define and describe a better boss? You see a quote here. My leader knows my name and the names of my kids. Obviously, she cares about me. The operative word in that phrase is cares. The number one thing that we heard over and over and over and over, I heard it scores, if not hundreds of times in the personal interviews that I conducted. Top talent said, we want a boss that will demonstrate care. So obviously many ways to do that, but that's how we wanted to take some of these concepts that could feel a bit academic or theoretical or even conceptual and put some meat on the bones and say, here are some behaviors that you as a leader can cultivate and actually create the environment that top talent really wants. So one of the things, we're not going to get into it today, but as you get into the book, you will find there's some very tactical things that you can do to make this promise for top talent come to life. So that's our first finding. Top talent really does want a better boss. The next thing they're looking for is a brighter future. Now, again, you may be thinking, doesn't everybody want a brighter future? Well, I think we all want a brighter future. I think everybody on your payroll wants a brighter future, but it is much less of an issue for typical talent. Now, again, you got to get your head around, well, why would anybody not want a better future? Well, again, it's not that they don't want it, but typical talent doesn't really think about it. One of our key findings is that top talent is much more future-oriented than typical talent. They come into the interview asking a fundamentally different set of questions. I mean, they do want to know about compensation and benefits and things of that nature. Certainly they do. But those aren't the questions that will ultimately determine where they work. Now, of course, if you're not paying market wages, you're not in the game. But they're asking a different set of questions. They want to know, how will I grow? How will I be stretched? How will I be challenged? Because, see, top talent knows they're probably not going to work in one role, one job, or in one organization their entire career. So they're trying to figure out, how will this opportunity prepare me for this brighter future? They actually come into the job looking for different things than typical talent. They want to know how you're going to help them live into a brighter future. The third thing that they're looking for, again, now this was a little bit of a surprise, kind of lowercase s. If you'd have asked me before I started this work, I would have predicted some type of leadership answer and a growth answer. And not that I'm that smart, but I've hung around with a lot of talented people, a lot of top talent in my life, and I would have guessed those. I don't know that I would have articulated this. Top talent wants a bigger vision. Now, I want to confess what we did here is we pushed two ideas together, two things that we found in the data that I believe fit under this banner. The first is that top talent cares a lot more about the mission and the vision and the values of an organization than do their typical talent counterparts. It really does matter to them why an organization is in business and how an organization thinks about the beliefs that will drive behavior. I think it actually has something to do with personal resonance. They're looking for an organization that they'll be proud to be part of. But the second thing is that top talent wants to be part of an organization that's making a difference, because top talent wants to make a difference in the world. So when we put those ideas together, we decided to label them under this idea of a bigger vision. So was there a surprise? Yeah, there was one. I mentioned it earlier. I called it an indirect finding. Now, you can agree with this or not, but it stumped us. So take a look at this statement. We met with leaders that said, I am providing exactly what top talent wants, but I'm not getting any credit from potential employees. I don't know why. I just cannot attract the people that I'm looking for. And we were scratching our head, because we're going, okay, if the research is as solid as we believe it is, we applied all the rigor that we possibly could. We hired professional people who do this for a living. This is what they came back with. We said, no. If this is true, how could leaders be experiencing this phenomena of not attracting top talent when they do the exact things that we said will attract top talent? So we started having conversations with leaders, trying to figure out what was really going on. And here's what we discovered. You actually have to tell the story. I met so many leaders after we had reached some of these conclusions who were saying this doesn't work. And I would say, well, now tell me, how are you telling the story? They said, well, we tell it in orientation. And I said, well, that won't hurt you, but it's actually not going to attract people to your organization. You've got to proactively, strategically, systematically tell the story outside your organization, and preferably where your candidates are. Whoever your candidate pool is, they have got to know that this is in fact the promise that you're willing to make, that when they hear your organization's name, they're going, okay, that's one of those places with a better boss that'll help me have a brighter future and that is pursuing a bigger vision. And of course, you know by now, based on Becky's opening comments, we believe that if you put all this together, what you can actually create is a talent magnet, a place so attractive that people will stand in line to come and work with you. So those are the things we found, the direct findings, the indirect findings, and I'd love to hear what questions that brings to mind for you guys.
And Mark, we have a few that have already been added. I want to invite everyone to continue to add more, and we'll stay around answering them as long as people have them. So just really quickly, Matt in Johnson City, Tennessee is wondering if you have any strategies for attracting top talent in a nonprofit environment with less benefits and lower compensation than the marketplace.
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I received that question last week, one of the very first times I have shared this information. And you may actually have an advantage over many of your marketplace competitors for that talent. I'm assuming that you and your team will be better bosses, right? If you're in the nonprofit world, I'm hoping your motives are pure. I'm believing that you're trying to be servant leaders. And so some of the finest leaders I know in the world are in nonprofits. So I'm going to give you full credit for that. Brighter future, I think there are a couple of facets here, but I think you still got to help people learn and grow. And I don't necessarily think it's as much about budget. I mean, I understand things cost money, but if you're saying, here's how you'll be stretched, here's how you'll grow, here are the opportunities you'll have, here's how you'll be challenged. And I've hung around enough nonprofits to know you probably got a long list of challenges. Top talent loves challenges. And then finally, if you're in a nonprofit world, I'm assuming that you've got a compelling vision, that you're actually trying to make the world a better place. And that is a critical part of the magnet for top talent. Now, what I have experienced personally, I'm not trying to project this on you, but I know a lot of nonprofits who can tick those three off and they haven't yet cracked the code on telling the story. And so I would encourage you to be proactive, to be strategic, think about deputizing the people that you already have, to use the networks that you're a part of. Certainly don't miss social media in all of its various platforms. And here, let me say this. When I talk about being strategic, I'm talking about telling the story that we just talked about on those channels. If I went to your website right now, would I know, based on what I see on your front page, that you're a talent magnet? Okay, maybe it's not the front page, but could I click one time and would I know the promise? Would I know that you're going to provide a better boss, a brighter future, and a bigger vision? So many of the nonprofits I know, that is more of a challenge than actually delivering on the elements that we just talked about. So I know it's hard work, but I think you can do this. Some of the finest people I know work in the nonprofit sector.
Thank you, Mark. That's really helpful. I have a couple of folks who have asked the question about how they can apply this in attracting and retaining volunteers.
Well, I don't want to be redundant, but I think it plays. I think volunteers, from my experience, and I've volunteered quite a bit and I've led volunteers for 40 years, they really do want to be well led. And I would say maybe the bar is even higher for a volunteer, because if you don't lead a volunteer well, you waste their time, they're probably not going to come back. So when I talk with churches, nonprofits, Christian schools, and others, I say you need to put a real premium on leadership. And so, again, I think volunteers, you don't have that paycheck to dangle over their head. So one of the most important factors is going to be the caliber of leadership. And that won't come without some focus, some intention, and some leadership to say, okay, we're going to develop the leadership acumen of those folks working with the volunteers. And then it goes back to skills that people can learn, the way they can grow. I think you can promise them a brighter future as a volunteer. I've done that personally and helped them develop skills that will be transferable to other parts of their lives. I've actually seen many organizations, marketplace organizations, affected by the things that we've been able to teach our volunteers. When we were building teams 20 years ago, we're teaching folks in a nonprofit how to build teams as volunteers, and they took that out into the marketplace, which made them more valuable to their employers. And then again, I think the volunteers are probably engaged to some extent because they have already bought into your vision. I would say keep sharing the vision, be sure there's alignment towards the vision, foster connection, help people see how what they're doing impacts the ultimate accomplishment of the vision. And then don't miss the chance to celebrate the successes. When you make progress, I think some people will kind of forget that volunteers need to be in that loop as well, that, hey, this is really working. What you're doing is really adding value. So I think the model applies spectacularly well to volunteers.
Thanks, Mark. I think I know the answer to this one, but I want to make sure that we share it. Rob is wondering about the research and whether there's a report from the research that's publicly accessible.
At this point, we have not made that available. I don't actually know if we're going to do that or not. Some of it is disclosure, and the organizations that let us into their databases, they have not been willing. We didn't even publish their names in our book. And the other thing is that much of it was qualitative. You go out and do 460 interviews, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of interview. We gleaned a lot of information there that may or may not be illuminated in the data. As an example, when you find that top talent values leadership and the leaders that they serve much more than typical talent, well, that still doesn't tell you. The example I gave was demonstrate care. It was when we took that data into those qualitative settings that the real richness emerged and the actual practices emerged. Because as I said, if I ask most folks what's it take to attract top talent, they're going to name at least two of the three things we found. I think much of the value was in the qualitative, those hundreds and thousands of hours of conversations. And it's real hard to capture that and publish that. I told somebody just recently, the reason I wrote the book was so you wouldn't have to read 10,000 pages of transcript.
Sure, that's really helpful, Mark. So Marianne mentioned that she's starting a company for research-based, value-driven financial education for children and teenagers. And she's wondering what might attract top performers to a totally new startup company that is yet to survive the market and the competition. So can these principles be applied in a startup environment?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I don't know that we actually talked to anybody who was part of a startup. I know that the big companies we spent time with were not part of a startup. What I want to believe, and I'm just us talking here, but so let me give you my perspective. The data set is so broad and it's so diverse and it's so rich. 14 to 65, all 50 states, all incomes, all professions, all different types of industries. I've got to believe that these are the things top talent wants, even if they're in a startup mode. But that's a hunch. That's my opinion. I can't actually cite that we talked to anybody in a startup. I don't believe they were included, not consciously. They could have participated in the online. We have only demographics from those online surveys. We don't know if it was a startup, as an example.
Sure. Well, having started my own company, maybe close to 6 years ago now, I wish that I had some of these principles in mind as I was starting. So Marianne, I would encourage you to really be thinking through, and Leaders Made here about developing a leadership culture would probably also be a really helpful resource to you.
I would also just say, startup mode or not, people are going to want to be well led, right? They're going to want a better boss. They're going to want to grow, right? They're going to want to feel like they're moving towards a better future. I just believe that intuitively. And I think they have to believe that it actually matters. I think vision is going to matter. So I don't think it'll hurt you, even though the research may not speak specifically to that.
Sure. So here's a quick question from Melody Davis, and she's wondering, how long will someone work for a poor boss when they are top talent? And I don't usually say last name, so I'm not sure how that rolled off. So sorry about that, in case you wanted to be private there.
Yeah, I don't think I know that. I think there are a lot of other factors, their life circumstances, their options and alternatives that people may or may not have, their obligations. I mean, and I'm not saying this is the case implied in her question. There are some people who work somewhere because of what is historically referred to as golden handcuffs. They may not have another option where they can earn as much income. And I'm not trying to judge people for doing things like that. I just think it would be very hard for me to say how long. One more thing, just to add to that, I'm not sure this answer is helping at all, but some of our greatest lessons can come from bad bosses. So I encourage people, if you don't feel led to leave and you're in that situation, you need to figure out what can you learn from that situation. And it may be nothing more than a list of behaviors that you want to be absolutely sure that you never expose someone else to, right? When I get my opportunity, when I get my shot, I'm not going to do this, 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 and this. So if you are in a bad situation and you don't feel like you can leave, I would say learn all that you can. Because I believe today is preparation for the future.
That's helpful, Mark. Thanks. Here's a comment from Bill. He said, for those of us in big organizations like the U.S. Navy, how would you recommend that mid-level leaders attack the need for talent to become a talent magnet and how to retain talent? So how can a mid-level leader implement the findings?
Well, it's interesting. Again, and I've shared several of the leadership best practices during the last few minutes. I think that's one thing that is powerful about this idea is that it's true for the frontline supervisor, it's true for the mid-level, and it's true for senior leaders because you ultimately want top talent throughout an organization. And so you want leaders that demonstrate care, as an example. Top talent says they want leaders that actually lead well. And again, I'm assuming that's at all levels. If you're a frontline supervisor or mid-level or whoever, top talent wants to be well led. And you move on, they want to be working for someone that is championing growth and promoting opportunity. Again, I think that transcends level. I believe that it transcends level. And certainly once you get to the vision, when you're thinking about ensuring alignment, that's our first leadership best practice. You know, the real power of a vision is only realized when an organization is aligned and when everybody is marching in the same direction, with the same goals, the same aspirations, employing the same core values. And so you think, well, what's the implication for mid-level leaders? Well, they need to ensure alignment. Oh, what's the implication for frontline leaders? They need to ensure alignment. And what's the implication for senior leaders? Oh, they need to ensure alignment. And so I actually believe we've tried to articulate this so that it is applicable at every level. Because here's the truth. If you don't have the daily support and participation of leaders, you will never create a talent magnet, which is why I said this book is about talent, but it's a leadership book. And it's a book of strategies and tactics for leaders to create a talent magnet. And again, you can't just isolate. I don't believe you can isolate one level and say, oh, well, this level has to do this and this level has to do this. There will be some nuances because, as an example, I cited ensure alignment as a leadership practice that applies at all levels. It certainly does. But generally, mid-level and entry-level leaders aren't setting the vision. So you might say, well, that is something unique and discrete for senior leaders. But once it's set, every leader has to work to ensure alignment. So I would say try not to segment these practices by level.
That's helpful. Thank you, Mark. Um, let's see. So, Mark, can you give us some examples or best practices for telling your story? You did start to speak to that a little bit about the timing of when to tell the story.
Yeah. So let me go back and say that this has been really fun because we've seen so many leaders who struggle with it. That was kind of why we were stumped, because people are going, some of this stuff you're saying doesn't work. And so we literally had to go out, and we're still looking for examples. So I would invite our audience today, anybody online, you got examples of how you tell the story, how you share, again, what some of our HR friends would call your employee value proposition. We tend, around here at the Chicken, we call it the promise. And these three now are the heart of the promise. But we're looking for ways. But let me share some of the things we found. Again, I've referenced them earlier. One, and don't miss this, is to deputize your people. I mean, your people can be tremendous brand ambassadors. They can be tremendous ambassadors for this message. You say, well, what's that look like? Well, it can look like whatever you want it to look like. I met with one leader who had chosen to deputize his leadership team. Now, he didn't tell everybody else they couldn't do it, but as speaking requests would come in, he would go to his leadership team and give those assignments to his leaders. And he said, hey, it's great development for them. They're actually a living example of a better boss. And so when somebody's hearing from this person and go, hey, she's bright. Hey, he's articulate. Oh, she looks like she cares. Like you're the power of testimony there through example. And they can tell this story. So some leaders have said, I'm just going to deputize my senior leaders. Others are deputizing their entire workforce. You could even create PowerPoint slides and videos to help tell the story so you could equip these people. You may have to actually do some training because some of your people may not be great communicators, but again, there's a development opportunity for them. And if they're top talent, you can say, hey, part of your brighter future, part of the way you're going to learn and grow is we're going to help you learn to communicate. We're going to put you in front of people. Not only are you going to be comfortable, you're going to be fantastic. And so deputizing people, leaders and others, is a huge way to do this. I also mentioned social media. It was, again, this may be a blinding flash of the obvious, again, to some of you, but I interviewed top talent and said, how did you find out about this job? And I remember the first person I talked to that kind of made me go, really? He said, on Instagram. I said, really? Like, okay, I knew there were a lot of ways to tell people about your value proposition, about your promise, but I promise you, I had never thought about, well, let's do something on Instagram. And so we are finding people that are using Instagram, they're using Twitter, they're using Facebook, they're using all these other methods and platforms to get the message out. One of our restaurant operators I talked to, he has a Facebook page for his restaurant. Now, it's not unusual if you were to go to any of the Facebook pages from any Chick-fil-A restaurants to see a lot of stuff about the food, because we're in the food business, right? We're in the restaurant business. I had one operator said, I don't put food stuff on my site. I said, you don't? He said, well, people know we sell food. He said, I'm talking about the experience of working here. That's what he finds. He said, I profile my people. I profile the good we're doing in the community. He said, I'm using this as a platform to recruit the kind of people that will connect and resonate. This was early in our process before we even had language for this. He said, no, you got to get it out there. And so that was just another example. So a lot of ways to do this. And I would say you got to tell the story yourself. Certainly we can empower others to help, but I think leaders have to be willing to tell the story. Now, let me give you one cautionary note, and I say this with full respect, but I run into some leaders that when you press them on this, those that say, oh, I tell the story all the time, they may not be telling the story that we talked about today. They may be talking about their historical story. They may be talking about the origins of their company. You know, and the fact that your organization was founded by a first-generation immigrant who came to the country with not much money is a fascinating story, and give honor and respect to the men and women who've done that, but that's actually not the story that top talent wants to hear. Remember, they're future oriented, and you're telling them about something that happened 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, and you say, I'm telling the story. And so what I've encouraged leaders to do is continue to tell that story in orientation. And the story you tell to top talent is, hey, if you come here, you'll have a better boss, you'll have a brighter future, you'll be part of a bigger vision. And so you can't just loosely define the story. What we've just shared during this broadcast, this is what top talent really wants.
Thank you, Mark. Daryl is wondering how you can attract great people to jobs that are perceived as entry level, such as laborer jobs.
Well, again, I think that's a big question. Here's my belief. Most people start at an entry level job. I guess there's some people that don't, and maybe some men and women coming out of college that may not, but a lot of people coming out of college start at an entry level job. And so I think it's, again, for top talent, it's more about the future even than the starting point. And I've seen this personally over my career. We have some folks who come to work for us who were qualified for much more, but they weren't thinking about today. They were thinking about the future. They were thinking, hey, I think I can have a brighter future here. I like the boss or the philosophy of leadership that I see here, because sometimes you don't even know who your boss is going to be. But an organization will have a reputation. A brand will have a reputation regarding their leaders. And you don't have to look very far to figure that out, whether it's on Glassdoor or wherever. You can find out about the leadership culture in most organizations. So if somebody says, I like that, and I also connect and resonate with the future that this organization is trying to bring to reality, and I believe I can grow here. I believe I can learn here. Sometimes people will take a job that they might be qualified for more. So again, we believe, based on what we've done, that top talent looks for these things independent of the role. I think there's top talent in those entry-level jobs. And I know some top talent who started in entry-level jobs, manual labor even. I know people who have vast influence today that started their career in manual labor. And I'm assuming they were top talent then. It just hadn't had a chance to flower and to flourish.
Sure. So Melody is asking for some clarification about brighter future and is wondering if that's about training and development or the corporate vision and how the corporation gives back to the world.
Yes, I'm sorry if I haven't made that clear. The vision is how it gives to the world. The brighter future is really more personal about what is the brighter future that I as an individual can live into. How will you help me grow? How will you challenge me? What opportunities will you make available? Will I have someone that will champion my growth? Now, what we're seeing is a somewhat maybe a universal trend. Organizations, even those that believe in growth and support growth, there seems to be a move that individuals have to own that with support from the organization. And so I think top talent's okay with that. But will the organization be supported? Will they challenge? Will they provide opportunity? And I think most top talent is okay setting their own agenda. But the vision is about the way an organization gives back, about what an organization believes. I'm sorry I didn't make that clear earlier.
Sure. So I'm seeing a lot of questions about talent retention. So Steve is saying, do the principals actually retain top talent because you might be able to attract them, but then the reality doesn't match the story or the promise. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, I've got a couple of thoughts on that. This was a story that we were trying to discover about attraction. What we learned anecdotally, because it was a study of what attracts them, what we've learned is they will stay longer if these conditions are met. And the opposite, we've actually heard from leaders, I've sat in the rooms with them, where they'll say, well, we didn't keep them. We got some top talent, but we didn't keep them. And when you find out why you didn't keep them, well, it's because the promise was bogus. right? I've even talked to leaders that said they had fallen in the trap of just paying more. Now, nobody in the world is going to turn down cash, and you might even use cash to attract some top talent. But I remember this leader, he said, I talked to 3 leaders specifically and about this issue. They said, we just decided to pay more, and you wouldn't believe the people we attracted. And guess what? They all left in a hurry. Well, why did they leave? Well, they decided, as our question referenced, the promise was not legit. It's like, maybe the boss was okay, because I'm talking to the leader, so he didn't want to say he wasn't okay. But he said we weren't helping them grow, we weren't providing challenge, and we really didn't have any vision that we could articulate as to why all this stuff mattered, why they should work harder. And so we believe that the quickest way to lose top talent is to not provide the things that they have told us resoundingly that they want and expect from a role.
Great. So Mark, another question that's come in is regarding how you know that this is what top talent wants, and it's not just a shift in the workforce mindset in general. Elise is asking, was there a control group, or what was different about the people who aren't considered top talent?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question, because this was a snapshot. And so could this reality have been different 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. Very possible. Could have been different a decade ago. But we know today that this is what they are telling us. And because the group was from age 14 to 65, which was intentional, I talked to people who said, oh, we've got work on some millennials that we could give you. And I said, look, thank you for that. But we're looking at the whole spectrum. Oh, and by the way, the millennial work that we were aware of talked about what millennials as a cohort want, not what the top millennials want. Because I told the research company, I don't care about 90% of the millennials. I want to know what will attract the top 10%. So to the question, could this be a point in time that reflects a changing mindset? It could, but it's true if you're 62 or 16. So if it shifted, then it has shifted across the entire landscape, and that is possible. But I'm confident that because of the longitudinal width or breadth of the study, that this could be true for a while. And could it shift? Will it shift? We've been looking already at research on the centennials, who would have been a very small, those born around the year 2000, they would have been a very small piece of this bigger study. So we're trying to figure out what are their attitudes about work. And oh, by the way, there are some differences between them and millennials, but we have not yet found any data to make us think that this wouldn't be true. It could be the reflection of a changing attitude about work. I think it absolutely could.
Thanks, Mark. Stephanie has a question related to temp agencies, and a lot of what you're talking about, Mark, is telling the promise in your recruiting efforts. So how can middle management attract top talent using a temp agency when you have that whole negative connotation that people sometimes get with temp agencies?
Goodness, well, that's another big question. I love Q&A because I'd like to talk to you about an hour. I need a cup of coffee to talk through that. So let me just give you a couple of quick thoughts. Forgive me for the brevity here. I've had some fantastic experiences with temp agencies. Now, I've had some not as good, but I still think, at least based on our interaction, is we have some say-so in that process. And I think we need to be very clear with these agencies who we are, what we're looking for, what matters to us. And there will be some men and women who those agencies will provide that will meet those expectations, and there will be some that don't. And when we have had those bad experiences, we send those people back to the agency because they're not who we're looking for. And so I don't want to provide that as an easy answer or a silver bullet. I mean, I know it's really hard, but I think we've got to keep our standards high. Your full-time workforce, if you're supplementing with an agency, they're paying attention to what you're allowing as far as their coworkers. And if you're not careful, I think you can lower the bar for your entire organization by the folks that you bring in. So I think we got to just try to keep our standards high and know that that's really hard to do.
Thanks, Mark. Henry is wondering how you can convince top leadership in a company that they need to change a plan and go after top talent when perhaps those leaders seem stuck in an old mindset and only focus on profits.
Well, okay, a couple of things. I actually think a top talent strategy will be more profitable. I think you're going to get people who are more engaged, who are more resilient, who are more growth minded, who are better performers, who will attract more top talent. And I don't know that there's much, if any, incremental costs, right? If you're recruiting typical talent, you still got to tell a story, right? And if you don't believe that your people can and should grow back to the better future or brighter future point, well, you're not going to keep a lot of top talent for long anyway, right? So that's kind of inherent in the proposition. I would just ask leaders if they want an organization that's going to perform at a higher level, then you need to be willing to say, we're actually going to try to attract better talent. It goes back to the very first thing I said when we started, is that if you increase the caliber of the players, you increase your chances of winning. And I think you got to look no further than the sports page every day in every sport around the world. It's no guarantee that you're going to win, but the organizations, the teams with the better players tend to win more often.
That's really helpful. We have so many great questions, and I want to thank everyone for your engagement, and I'm trying to get to as many of them as I can. If for some reason I have missed yours, you can always feel free to add it at the bottom, and I'll definitely bring my attention to it. So Susan is saying, Mark, that there are limited opportunities for advancement within her organization. Are there tips for showing employees that she cares about their growth without the possibility of like a career advancement?
Yes, I think career advancement is certainly part of the mix, but top talent wants to learn, and top talent wants to grow, and top talent wants opportunity. It may or may not mean a new job or a new role. It could mean more responsibility. It could be more autonomy. It could be more trust. So I understand that the advancement piece is part of it, but I would encourage you not to let that trip you up, because chances are they're not going to work with you forever regardless. I'm not saying to take a fatalistic view, but the data is staggering about how many job changes and career changes people are going to have coming into the marketplace, like today out of college, depending on whose numbers you look at, probably 11 to 16 job changes and probably multiple career changes. So again, if you invest in them, I think they'll stay longer. And if they actually need, for any number of reasons, a new title or a new position, that may be outside your organization. But if you help them grow, they're going to be more engaged while they're with you.
Great. So Kathy, our friend in Hawaii, is wondering what insights you can share about selling this concept to leadership when an organization is still working on developing the type of leaders that would be the better bosses that people are looking for.
Well, I think it's a concurrent process. I don't think you would wait. I think you would actually try to do these things almost simultaneously. Now, if you have an awful leadership culture, then it might be prudent for you to try and shore that up. But I don't mean to communicate that it is necessarily sequential, because you're going to want all of these things going on perpetually, forever, always. But yeah, you need to shore up that leadership culture as quickly as you can, because if you don't do that, then it is going to be very, very difficult to make much progress beyond that. How do you sell it to leaders? Again, I think you have a conversation. Again, whatever analogies and metaphors that you find helpful. Again, look at the teams, even in the sports world, that tend to show up at the top. There's a talent component. You look at how many times the New York Yankees have made it. You know, they have the highest payroll, and they don't make it every year, but you look over the last 40 years, how many times they've been in the playoffs versus the teams that have the lowest payroll. And you say, well, that's all about money. But in sports, with such a small base, that's how you actually get those people. Now, do you keep them? Right? That's a whole different story. But the teams with the best talent tend to win. I think that's the pitch to senior leaders, is that we want to win, and we're going to recruit talent anyway. So why don't we put together a proposition that will be meaningful to them, that will be attractive to them? And I said it before, I want to say it again, I just referenced pay. You got to pay market wages. I mean, top talent wants to be paid, and you got to pay, you got to offer competitive benefits. So I'm not suggesting that this will overcome that, although we do have examples and illustrations which are fascinating, and they're anecdotal. But I remember one leader that said, it's not a leader, this is just an individual, that said they had been offered a significant increase to move to the competition. Significant, staggering increase, and they did not. And I said, why not? And they talked about their boss. They talked about what they were learning, how they were growing, and they talked about the difference the organization was trying to make in the world. We hadn't even reached our conclusions yet. So there are those cases where people will say, no, I'm going to play the long view. But don't be mistaken. I'm not saying to pay under market wages. I think you got to pay people what the market demands. But this is how you get the best ones to come to you, knowing that they're going to get a competitive wage.
That's really helpful. And a few people had questions related to wages, so it's good that we looped back around to that. Rob, referencing your comments earlier about alignment, is wondering if there are some simple clues that you can share that will help leaders understand that the talent is in alignment with the vision of the organization.
Well, let me start by saying there is a very, very simple technique that I have been advocating and using with groups for decades now. And it sounds kind of hokey, so stay with me here. But walk into your next leadership meeting, whatever level you are, right? If you're a frontline supervisor, if you're middle management, or you're senior leader, walk into that meeting and hand out 3x5 cards, blank, simple 3x5 cards, and ask them any one of several questions. So I want everybody to write down our vision or our mission or our key strategies or anything else that you want to test your level of alignment, and then take those up. And if they're not all the same, you're not aligned. Oh, and by the way, if you're not aligned at the senior level, it's impossible, humanly, physically impossible to be aligned at different levels throughout an organization. So I think ensuring alignment is to be sure that we are talking about the same thing, the same way, that what's important, what's valued, the beliefs that are driving our behavior, that you're in lockstep, you're in unison as much as possible from top to bottom. Now, parenthetically, this is bonus free content. Let me share this. In our book, Chess Not Checkers, we spent almost 5 years trying to figure out what is it that high performance organizations all have in common. And this was research with the Navy SEALs and world championship sailing teams and famous successful businesses. You would know their names if I started sharing them, and trying to say, what is it all high performance organizations have in common? One of those things is they act as one. That's the language we chose, but it's all about alignment. So I would say a daily responsibility and challenge of leaders, not just so you can attract top talent. So if you ever aspire to be a high performance organization, you will not get there without alignment.
So I think we're about out of time for questions, Mark, but for those of you who shared questions that we didn't get to, we will be sharing the questions with Mark, and perhaps in the future you can answer some of those in a blog post or some other way. So I know you have some closing comments, and then we have some resources that we want to share.
Sure. Let me say one more thing. You're going to send me the questions that came in that we haven't answered. I'm going to suggest that if you come up with a new question tonight, tomorrow, or next week, my cell number is printed in the back of the book, but some of you don't have the book. So let me just go ahead and give it to you. 678-612-8441. So Becky will send me the questions that you've already come up with, but don't hesitate to reach out if I can serve. So here's why all this matters. You can see this final slide. More than vision, strategy, creativity, marketing, finance, or even technology, people ultimately determine the success of an organization. So as a leader, I'm thinking, I want the very best people possible. Based on what we've learned, I've not met an organization on the planet or a leader on the planet who couldn't create a talent magnet if you decide to. And that's my hope that you will do just that. It's been great being with you.
Thanks, Mark. So before we go, we do want to share some great resources. And if you're interested in some of the actionable ideas that Mark has been talking about, you're going to want to get your hands on the Quick Start Guide. It's this tiny little resource. You could put it in your back pocket. And
so close to the camera that it looks really big.
It's not. See, here's my hand, and here's the Quick Start Guide. Is that better? And we also have a special launch week incentive or whatever for those of you who are buying the book, and I will put in our follow-up email the link. But for anyone who buys the book this week and fills out our form, we are going to send 5 of these to you, print copies of the Quick Start Guide, as long as supplies last in our office. So I will share that link with you in the follow-up email. But if you're interested in getting the Quick Start Guide, one way to get it is to buy the book this week, to go to our form and let us know that you've bought it, and we'll send you 5. After this week, and if you want additional resources, both the Talent Magnet Quick Start Guide, which is this little hand-sized resource, and the Field Guide, which has more extensive information, are available at integrateleadership.com, and we'll also put this link in your follow-up email. I think, is there another slide, Aubrey, with other follow-up? I think there is. This is, yes. Oh, it's a thank you slide. Okay. So this is the first week that Talent Magnet has been available in the world. We hope that you'll go today and buy it from your favorite online retailer, or if you're traveling through the Atlanta airport, I have one other offer for you. Mark's book is going to be displayed and advertised in Atlanta at the airport, and we're looking for photos of the book and the advertising in Atlanta. So if you send me, Becky at weavinginfluence.com, a picture from the Atlanta airport, Mark will personalize a book and we will get it out to you. So there are a few special offers. We'll put them all in the email, and we want to thank you for investing your time with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Becky, and thanks to everyone.